point of this concert was that we were invited to play those two Christopher Rouse pieces, and they're really beautiful pieces. That wasn't so. In other words, it wasn't our proposition to play them. But that's kind of irrelevant because I'd known about the pieces for a long time, wanted to play them, and never really found a good programming option for them. So sort of the thing we wanted to do fell into our lap in a way, which was really great. And there are two pieces which are influenced by the rhythms of traditional percussion music, one from Hawaii, one from Haiti. And so when you listen to the way in which those rhythms interlock, and it's really strongly propelled rhythmic music, then it's a kind of a fusion of Western art ideas about the structure of the piece and traditional drumming ideas on a kind of local level. So it's actually a fascinating, it's been a fascinating project. In the world of percussion, the fusion of world traditions with Western ideas of composition is really an old one. I mean, by that I mean it comes from the 1930s and has really been a part of the life of contemporary percussion really from the inception. I mean, Edgard Varese wrote a piece for 13 percussionists playing 40-some instruments called Ionization, and in that piece you find gongs and bongos and claves and cowbells and all of the instruments from different world cultures sitting right next to one another. And that wasn't really not that unusual for percussion, but in the world of string playing, for example, you would never find, or well, still rarely would find a koto, a sitar, a bluegrass fiddle, and a Strad cello in the same ensemble. But for percussion, it was always very natural to do that. So this has been a part of our vocabulary, part of our lifeblood for quite a long time. I don't know the music of Huang Ruo, and I'm really looking forward to hearing that. But the other composers on that concert have been favorite composers and friends of mine for a long time. Steve Mackey, I've known on and off, and not terribly well, but consistently over the years because of my association with Bang in a Can and the fact that he was very often at those marathons, and I saw him, and I think he's an extraordinary composer, and I'm really very curious to hear the piece. And Kaya Sariaho was a classmate of mine in Freiburg, and when I was a Fulbright student in Germany, and I've played her music and loved it, over the course of the years. And so these are not sort of incidental, marginal composers at all. These composers are extremely important to us, and I'm really looking forward to hearing those pieces. There's a commercial force behind contemporary music. I own, for example, 3 recordings of the cycle of Beethoven symphonies. I'm extremely unlikely to buy a 4th. But if the Los Angeles Philharmonic or New York or Chicago or any orchestra releases a recording by a contemporary composer I'm interested in, I'll buy that. And so I think there's a commercial motivation behind the promulgation of contemporary music in what were mainstream environments. But I'll give you you can cut all this out, but I'll give you a good example in the world of percussion. I was invited to do a project with the Marine Corps percussion section. We're still trying to find a date, but I think, wow, if the Marine Corps band is interested in contemporary music and the kind that I've championed, then that's about as mainstream as you can get. And so I think you're finding that contemporary music, by small increments and little victories, is working its way into the mainstream vocabulary. Now, it is not that you have to go find it, but that if you don't want it, you have to resist it. And that's a very different paradigm than it ever has been. Access has always been a problem, and access to good performances of contemporary music. If you hear a bad performance or a lackluster performance of a piece of challenging music, why would you ever go back? I mean, I wouldn't. So the nice thing about having access via iTunes and other outlets that way is that you can really hear good recordings of interesting pieces, and then if you don't like it, then at least you know you're rejecting something that's of a high level. Yeah. the definition of what constitutes contemporary music has changed. It's broadened considerably in the last 25 years. I mean, there are lots of interesting composers for film, for example, and there are composers who work in crossover genres that combine popular music and what we would have called classical music. And then there are still sort of modernist composers making new vocabularies and writing, you know, modern music in quotation marks. And so we have a lot to choose from. And I think the question of how contemporary music works its way into the fabric of society has a lot to do with the question of what good is contemporary art anyway. And if you look at the other arts, at theater, dance, painting, etc., you find that the most vital of those forms are the contemporary ones. A new piece of theater brings out the audiences. A new dance brings out the audience in a way that, for example, a presentation of older work does not. Music seems to have gotten that equation backwards, in that older music still seems to have a greater commodity value. But I see it changing, and I wouldn't be surprised that if we can figure out a way in which contemporary art influences our lives and informs our lives, then we'll find that we not only find space for it, that we need it. And at that point, it will become the mainstream art that we see in the worlds of theater and dance, I think. I find it odd that in every other area of our lives, we expect, in fact, the latest developments. If you go to the doctor and that doctor pulls out a pan of leeches to treat you with in the way they would have in the late 18th century and early 19th century, you'd run fleeing. So why a mainstream audience would insist on being treated with music of that, only music of that same vintage, is a little bit beyond me, I have to say. Here's the big problem, and look, I don't have anything to do with one of those big budget arts organizations. I'm a soloist. I play at people's requests, and I'm involved with the La Jolla Symphony, which is a community orchestra, and I think a very, very fine institution, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But, so I'm not in the position of, like, what would it be like to be the San Diego Symphony and have $125 million that you're afraid of losing, you know. But I can tell you this, that if artists don't lead, then they may as well be bankers. Then the function of an artist has been completely lost if an artist doesn't lead. And so what I loved about Tom Nee, for example, is that he insisted on putting traditional classical music on the same program as contemporary music, and he put the contemporary music in the middle so that there was no way you could get around it. And he said, this is what art is, and we will lead you in this way. And people followed him. And so to tell you the truth, I don't really buy at all the argument that the only function of an artist is to respond to the dictates of the marketplace. If you lead, then you're doing something that is so much more valuable that people will come, because making a choice is practically a revolutionary act today. And if you make a choice that you're going to do something worthwhile, and not just take a poll to see what everybody wants you to play, then otherwise let's just play 1812. You know, let's do it with real cannons or something like that. You know, that'll be a shocker. No, I mean, I think the function of an artist is to say, this is the world that I envision, and that he or she then sets about making works of art that articulate that world. And if we don't do that, we are wasting everybody's time. I just saw, I don't know if you follow baseball, but I just saw Bill Spaceman Lee pitch. Mm-hmm. The Spaceman pitched for the Red Sox in the 1970s, right? You know, but he's 63, so he was pitching against a minor league team of 20-year-olds. They couldn't hit him. They had no idea what to do with a 59-mile or 49-mile-an-hour curveball, you know. It's just nuts. And so you find these mavericks all over the place. And if you were to expunge the influence of somebody like Bill, or somebody like Tom Nee, or someone like my friend John Luther Adams, or the mavericks among us, and mostly these are not names that people know. You take those influences away and you've got Let's Make a Deal, nothing more than that. And so I think that what our job is, you and I as artists and involved in this world, is, yeah, Beethoven was a great composer, and we will play Beethoven with the La Jolla Symphony, and you will film Beethoven, I'm sure, and this is nothing against that. By playing the music of John Luther Adams or Charles Ives or John Cage, we do not diminish Beethoven, but we inject the vocabulary with an edge of resistance. which is the artist's primary function in society. Pauline Oliveros used to say that I'll just keep doing my thing and people will discover me and forget me many times over the course of my lifetime, and I think there's that. But you said something at the beginning which I think is really a provocative statement. How do you keep up with everything? And I don't think that's really the goal, because I think the general malaise now, which is that ask anybody how they are and they'll start by telling you how busy they are, is that we have a close-up view of all the details of life and almost no meta view of anything, almost no big picture, no way to decide what's important to us and what's not. And again, I mean, not to be too heavy-handed about this, but isn't that why we make art? Because a work of art, a great one, let's take one that everybody recognizes, like Beethoven's Third Symphony, is really a prism that says this thing is important and this thing isn't important. I mean, that exists on a societal level in terms of the kind of statement Beethoven was making. But even on a localized musical level, he tells you what to listen to. This harmonic change, this is really critical, and this one not so much. And so I think, you know, in 2008, we find ourselves just pressed up against a surfeit of information and very, very little way to filter it or to understand how things fit together and to make choices. Again, I think that works of art are the one contribution an artist can make to the sense of how to establish a vision for your life, and not simply a way of coping with it.